It was late November in Colorado, and I must have been around 7, maybe 8 years old. My dad decided we should do something different for the weekend. He wanted to rent a cabin up in the mountains and spend a few days there together. My mom thought it was a great idea too. She said it would be good for us to have some family time away from everything. Just her, my dad, my sister, and me. I didn't complain, especially since it meant missing school that Friday so we could leave early. The drive up felt long, and by the time we pulled into the cabin, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. The air was biting cold, the kind that makes your breath come out in white clouds, and I remember thinking it was even colder than I expected for November. But my dad just laughed and said, "That's the Rockies for you." We carried our bags inside and settled in. The cabin smelled faintly of old wood and smoke, like it hadn't been used much lately. My parents picked their room, my sister and I claimed ours, and before long we were eating a simple dinner, talking about what we'd do the next day. It was too dark to go exploring that first night, so we all headed to bed. I don't know why, but I had trouble falling asleep. Maybe it was because the bed creaked every time I shifted, or maybe it was just the unfamiliar sounds of the forest. Sometime in the night I heard crunching outside, like footsteps on frozen leaves. Curious, I pulled back the curtain and squinted into the dark, but I couldn't see anything. I told myself it had to be an animal. But then it came again, about 15 minutes later, louder this time. I nudged my sister awake. She was 11 at the time, and she listened too. Her eyes got wide, and she whispered, "Do you hear that?" We both crept to the window and thought we saw something moving just at the edge of the tree line. Not wanting to be spotted, we quickly ducked away. Neither of us slept much after that. When morning came, everything felt normal again. Mom was at the stove making breakfast, and Dad was already outside. I asked if I could go out and help him, and she said yes. My sister stayed in the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. When I stepped outside, I saw my dad talking with someone I didn't recognize. He was a short, stocky man with a shaved head and a dark green veteran's cap pulled low over his forehead. He looked nervous, I guess is the word. He was sweating even though it was freezing out. My dad turned and introduced me. "This is my son," he said proudly. The man gave me a quick smile and said, "Name's Patrick. Nice to meet you, kid." I said hello back, but then blurted out, "You look kinda scared. Are you okay?" He gave a short cough, almost like a laugh, and said, "I'm fine. Just some shell shock. Served in the military." I remember nodding, though it was obvious from his hat. At first, Patrick seemed friendly enough. He told my dad he was staying in a cabin nearby with his family, so he thought he'd come over and say hello. My dad invited him inside for breakfast, and everything felt normal. Afterward, Dad, Patrick, and I went outside again. While we were out there, I tripped on a patch of ice and scraped my knee. It stung, and I started crying. My dad rushed inside because Mom was calling for him, leaving me with Patrick. Patrick crouched down quickly and said, "Don't worry, kid. I've got bandages back at my cabin. Come on, I'll fix you up." Without thinking much, I agreed. I was young, and it didn't occur to me that going with him might not be the smartest idea. On the walk, he asked me casual questions at first. What games I liked, what I did for fun. But then he started asking strange things. "What size shoe do you wear? How much do you weigh?" I didn't really know the answers except for my age, so I told him that. He chuckled and said, "Good to know." That's when I realized his cabin wasn't anywhere close. It took us nearly half an hour of walking through the woods to get there. My knee had stopped bleeding a long time ago, but I figured we were already too far in to turn back. When we finally reached it, he motioned for me to go inside first. The second I stepped in, my stomach dropped. The place was messy, with clothes and dishes scattered everywhere, and there was no sign of a family. I asked where his wife and kids were. He didn't answer, just turned the lock on the door and said, "I'll grab that bandage for you." He came back from the kitchen with one, crouched down, and carefully stuck it on my knee. but as he held my leg in place, his other hand rubbed slowly up and down. "You're a strong kid," he said with a smile. "Pretty muscular for your age." I froze. My gut told me something wasn't right. I quickly stood up, saying my leg felt fine now, and mentioned my parents were probably looking for me. He just smiled wider and told me to stay for lunch. I didn't want to, but the door was locked, and I wasn't sure I could find my way back alone. As we ate, he asked more unsettling questions, again about my weight, my age, and then muttered, "Perfect weight." I nervously asked what he meant, but he just kept grinning. Then there was a loud bang from the bedroom down the hall. Patrick's smile vanished. He stormed over, slammed the door shut, and started yelling. I couldn't make out all the words, but I distinctly remember him saying, "I told you not to move. I have company." When he came back out, he was calm again, almost cheerful. "Sorry," he said. "My wife's sick. Can't be around visitors." Not long after, a pale, exhausted-looking woman slipped out of the room. Her face was blotchy from crying, and her eyes were red. She mumbled, "I'm hungry." Patrick's expression twisted, and he barked at her to get back inside. She glanced at me before obeying. By then, I was terrified. When Patrick brought out a set of children's clothes and suggested I try them on, I broke down crying. He hugged me tightly and said, "It's okay, little one. Nothing bad is going to happen. Just trust me." When he went into the back room again, I knew it was my only chance. I unlocked the door and slipped out, running as quietly as I could. The woods felt endless, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be as far away from that cabin as possible. From a distance, I heard him shouting, first at his wife, then into the trees. "Where'd you go, kid? Come back. You don't have to try on the clothes. I've got toys for you." His voice carried, desperate and angry. I hid behind a tree, holding my breath. Through the branches, I saw him outside, scanning the forest. Then he moved deeper in, calling out for me. That was all the motivation I needed. I ran. It felt like forever, but eventually I stumbled onto a clearing and saw my family's cabin. My dad was outside, pacing and looking panicked. The moment he saw me, I sprinted into his arms, sobbing. I blurted out everything, that Patrick had touched my leg, asked weird questions, locked me inside, and lied about having a family. My dad's face hardened immediately. He called the rental office, and they confirmed no one had rented the cabin Patrick had brought me to. We packed our things right away and demanded a refund for the remaining days. The man who managed the cabins called the police. They went out to check the place, but by the time they arrived, Patrick and his wife were gone. Clothes and belongings were still scattered inside, but no sign of either of them. We never heard another word about it. The police didn't follow up, and to this day I don't know who Patrick really was, or what he wanted with me. All I know is that his name was almost certainly fake, and he definitely wasn't a veteran. Sometimes I wonder about that pale woman, and whether she was there by choice. I was about 14 when this all happened, and back then I wasn't exactly in the best place mentally. I'd already been dealing with anxiety and depression for a while, so I was always on edge and very aware of everything around me. I think that's why I remember every little detail of this night so clearly. It burned itself into my brain, and I've never really shaken it off. That weekend, I had plans to stay over at my friend's place. Normally she was the one who'd come over to mine, so this was the first time I was actually staying the night at hers. I remember feeling both excited and uneasy, mostly because I'd never been to her house before, and she lived in a pretty unusual spot. To give you the picture, her house, or more like her living arrangement, was strange compared to what I was used to. The property sat on this steep sloped road out in the middle of the bush. When you first drove down, the first thing you'd see was this huge mansion-like house looming over everything. It looked fancy at first glance, almost out of place. But as you kept going down the driveway, there were these two small, run-down units at the bottom. One of them was basically just a bedroom, and the other had a bedroom with a tiny bathroom and a small kitchen. My friend's room was in the one that was just the bedroom. while her mum stayed in the other unit that had the bathroom and kitchen. Her space was sectioned off in this weird way too. The landlord used part of her bedroom for storage, and he had thrown up a divider and a big shelf to block that area off. At the front of her room, there was a big glass sliding door, and in the back, hidden behind all the storage, there was another door. You couldn't even get to that one without squeezing around outside. To make things creepier, the property was surrounded by nothing but thick Australian rainforest. And when I say thick, I mean you couldn't see more than a few feet in before the trees swallowed everything. Anyone who's been around Australian bushland knows how dense it can get, and how alive it is with spiders, leeches, ants, just about everything you don't want crawling on you. Early in the day, we went over to her mum's unit for something, maybe to grab food or ask about phone reception. I remember we called out for her mum, and her voice came from the bathroom. But then, just as we were passing the little window, I swear I heard a man's voice outside saying, "Yeah?" It stopped me in my tracks because there shouldn't have been anyone there. My friend heard it too, and we looked at each other confused. If her mum was right in front of us, why did we hear a man answer outside? We tried to shrug it off. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but we both knew something about that didn't sit right. As night came around, things got heavier. We went to use the bathroom in her mum's unit and tried not to wake her since she was already asleep. On the short walk back to my friend's room, we froze halfway. There was something standing in the tree line. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. There were two faint reflections. Eyes. Watching us. I can still remember the way my chest tightened when I realized it wasn't some animal. The spacing was wrong. It was a man. Whoever it was didn't move, just stood there, staring from the shadows of the trees. I panicked and snapped a quick photo on my phone before we bolted back into my friend's room, slammed the glass door shut, locked it, and yanked the curtains closed. My hands were shaking when I brightened the photo, but the image confirmed it. There was a man standing between the trees watching us. We tried calling my mum, who lived about an hour away, but she told us it was probably nothing, and we shouldn't scare ourselves. That dismissal didn't calm us down much. Still, after a while, we tried distracting ourselves by putting on a movie, something lighthearted, just to take our minds off of what we thought we saw. We'd only gotten maybe half an hour into the film when we both muted it at the same time. There were footsteps outside, slow, heavy crunches on the leaves, close enough that we knew someone was right there. They weren't passing by either. They stopped, then started moving toward the narrow path that led to the hidden back door behind all that storage. We climbed up on the bed, peering over the divider, staring at the back door. For a moment it was silent, and then the doorknob rattled, first gently, then harder, as if someone was testing it. My stomach dropped. The only reason that door wasn't opening was because it was blocked by all the landlord's junk piled against it. The knob jiggled faster and harder until suddenly it stopped. Whoever was out there stood in silence. We huddled together, whispering to each other not to make a sound. After what felt like forever, the crunch of footsteps started again, this time moving back around toward the front of the room. That's when I dialed the police with shaking hands. Trying to explain to the operator what was happening while sobbing wasn't easy, but she said a unit would be dispatched and to stay where we were. As we waited, something else cut through the night, a loud, shrill ringing, like one of those old landline phones. It was coming from the landlord's mansion up the hill. It rang for minutes, long enough to make us exchange horrified looks, until finally, we heard his voice answering. We couldn't make out what he was saying, but the timing made it feel connected. Then we noticed something new. Fingerprints smeared on the glass of the sliding window. The kind where someone had cupped their hand and dragged it down. Neither of us had touched it earlier. Eventually, the landlord came stomping down to my friend's mum's unit, visibly angry, and said the police had called him. He bragged that he told them not to bother coming. Her mum came to check on us, but she didn't seem nearly as concerned as we were. That made the whole thing even scarier, the way both of them acted like nothing was wrong. We were done after that. There was no way we could spend the night there. I called my mom again, and she finally came to get us close to midnight. The next day, when we brought my friend home, her mom told us something else had happened after we left. She said the pole outside her place, the one that had been set in cement and zip-tied for support, had been knocked down in the night. It had been sturdy, no way the wind could have taken it. To this day, I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was the landlord, maybe someone else. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through the woods. They were trying to get inside. A while back, my friend Claire asked if I wanted to tag along to a birthday party. It was for a girl named Anna, who she used to be really close with back in middle school when they both went to the same private Catholic school. By the time high school rolled around, Claire ended up going to public school, which is where she and I met, while Anna went to a different Catholic high school. They didn't hang out much anymore, so Claire didn't want to go alone. Anna's parents had rented out this cabin for her birthday. Apparently, they'd done the same thing the year before, and she had managed to throw a big party without her parents really catching on. That night was supposedly a success, so she had planned on repeating it. When we drove up, I remember how cut off from everything it felt. There wasn't another house or cabin in sight, just thick woods that swallowed up the road behind us. In winter, the whole place seemed more abandoned than festive. We had to use our phone lights just to find our way to the front door. Once we were inside, things seemed normal enough. Music was going, people were drinking, and Anna was in good spirits. But right away I noticed there were two groups that didn't really blend together. Anna's close friends and classmates seemed to stick to one side, while another group lingered separately. Claire nudged me at one point to look at a guy leaning against the wall. He had the name of our city tattooed across his neck in jagged lettering. We exchanged looks and tried not to laugh, though there was also this tiny part of me wondering what kind of people these were. It didn't take long before the tension between the two groups started showing. I heard someone whisper that the guys hadn't even brought their own drinks and were helping themselves to everyone else's. There were also murmurs about one of them being on probation. Eventually, someone suggested telling them that a ranger was going to stop by and that only a couple cars were supposed to be on the property. Word spread quick, and not long after, the group left. People were relieved, and it felt like the plan worked. Except it didn't. Just a few minutes later, one of the girls from that same group strolled back in. She raised her voice and said she wanted to wish Anna a happy birthday. The way she said it made everyone stop what they were doing. Then, almost immediately, the sound of breaking glass came from one of the back rooms. Another crash followed, then another. People started yelling as more windows shattered one after the other. I remember sitting there in shock, not moving. Claire and I had barely been at this party for half an hour, and suddenly it felt like we were in the middle of some ambush. That same girl casually mentioned that at least one of the guys had a gun, which made everything worse. Most of us stayed huddled inside, though a couple of braver people went out to check. After a while, some started leaving in small groups. Everyone was nervous about walking out into the dark, but staying wasn't much better. At one point, 3 girls who had been planning on spending the night decided they'd had enough. They gathered their stuff, arms full of pillows and overnight bags, and made for the door. The second they stepped outside, screams echoed through the woods. The 3 of them bolted right back in, dropping half their things. One girl even burst into tears. It turned out the screams weren't from the guys at all, but from another girl arriving late to the party who had spotted her friend and screamed in excitement. Looking back, it's almost funny, but in the moment nobody was laughing. Claire and I stayed longer than we wanted to. We didn't feel right leaving Anna behind when the place had thinned out so much. By the time we finally left, it was close to 2 in the morning, and only a couple of people were still there with her. We all thought about calling the police, but between the underage drinking and Anna's fear of her parents finding out, the idea was dropped. She even said she'd just make up an excuse for the broken windows. It still blows my mind that she wasn't more worried about those guys coming back, but I guess people handle stress differently. They never did return, and nothing worse happened. But the whole night was bizarre. Out of all the parties I've ever been to, that one felt the most surreal, partly because of how quickly it all escalated, and partly because of how ridiculous it all seemed once it was over. When I was a kid, my family didn't take many trips. Money was always kind of tight, and even though my dad was good at his job, he was never good at money. He worked as a programmer from home, and sometimes he'd land big contracts that paid well. But the debts hanging over him, and the way my mom handled bills, meant we rarely saw any of that. Vacations were a luxury we didn't expect. Most summers we just visited relatives or stayed home, so when something different came up, it stood out in a big way. At the time of this story, I was 11. My older sister Ariel was 14, and my younger sister Belle was only 8. Our parents were in their late 30s then, both stressed all the time but still trying to make memories for us. I remember the night it all started because we were sitting together watching a scary movie, Final Destination, which my dad loved for reasons I'll never understand. Belle was already clinging to our dog Duchess, pretending not to be terrified, while Dad chuckled every time something ridiculous happened on screen. In the middle of the movie, the phone rang. Dad answered, then called Mom into the kitchen, leaving the three of us with the film paused and Duchess trapped in Belle's arms. When they came back, they looked oddly cheerful. Dad explained that the client he'd just finished a project for owned a cabin up in the mountains and was letting us use it for the weekend at almost no cost. That kind of thing never happened for us, so we were buzzing with excitement. Mom immediately started packing like we were moving across the country, throwing clothes into bags, gathering food, double-checking lists. The next day after school, we loaded up the van and started the 2.5-hour drive. It was dark by the time we arrived, and the road up felt like it went on forever. The cabin itself sat near a quiet lake, surrounded by trees so thick you couldn't see anything else. Inside it was cozy, but a little worn, like people used it often. There was this lofted crawl space with shelves of board games that Ariel immediately claimed as her hangout spot. Mom and Dad took the biggest bedroom. Ariel picked the small one, which left Belle and me sharing a queen bed in the last room. The only odd thing was the closet in our room. It was locked tight, and no one could get it open. We joked about treasure or skeletons being in there, but really, it just made the room feel incomplete. That first night, Belle and I went to bed around 11. I ended up sleeping on the side with the lamp because she tended to kick in her sleep, and I didn't want the lamp crashing down on us. Sometime after I drifted off, I woke up to Belle digging her nails into my arm. She was wide-eyed, whispering frantically, and pointing at the window. When I turned, I caught a glimpse of something pale, like a person's shape, moving away from the glass outside. My brain was still groggy, so it took a second to process. But then adrenaline hit, and I yanked Belle off the bed. We bolted to our parents' room, blurting out what we'd seen. Dad tried to reassure us, saying it was probably just our imaginations. Mom sent us back, reminding us we were in the mountains where shadows and animals could play tricks on tired eyes. Even though I wasn't convinced, I agreed, mostly because I didn't want to argue. Belle refused to sleep near the window again, so we swapped places, and I read to her until she fell asleep. The next day we explored the lake a little before heading into the nearest town. It was a small place with antique shops and diners, and my parents seemed determined to walk through every store. We spent most of the day there and didn't return until late. As we pulled up the driveway to the cabin, Ariel cracked a joke that had us laughing, but Dad suddenly went silent and lifted his hand to hush us. He stepped onto the porch, nudged the door open with just his finger, and stood there for a moment. Something about the way the door moved, unlocked, unlatched, made my stomach twist, even though I didn't understand why at the time. We waited outside while he disappeared inside. When he called us in, he had this serious look on his face. He locked the door behind us and took Mom into their room. Ariel distracted Belle and me with one of the board games until they came back out. Dad joined us at the table, trying to act normal. but I noticed how often his eyes flicked toward the windows. That night, Dad told us all to go to bed earlier than usual. Ariel was annoyed, but Belle and I didn't argue. We climbed back into the queen bed, this time with Belle near the lamp and me closer to the window. I read aloud again until she fell asleep, then dozed off myself. What woke me was Dad rushing into our room. He scooped Belle out of bed with one arm, grabbed my wrist with the other, and pulled us into the hall. Mom was already there, dragging Ariel along. Duchess, our dog, was at the back door, hackles raised, letting out a strange whining growl. Dad didn't explain. He just shoved us into the van, went back for the dog, and then tore down the mountain road like something was chasing us. None of us spoke the entire ride home, and even when we finally got back, he refused to say anything about it. The next day, Ariel learned the truth, but Belle and I weren't told until years later. What happened was that Dad woke up to faint sounds outside their bedroom window. It wasn't animal noises. It was low human sounds, almost like someone was whispering or groaning. When he checked, he found the front door unlocked, items in the kitchen shifted around, and the back door slightly ajar. Duchess had gone rigid, growling at whatever was beyond that door. That was when he made the call to get us out immediately. When he returned later in the day to gather our belongings, he found several sets of footprints pressed into the dirt outside the window of the room Belle and I had been sleeping in. The sight of them explained everything he hadn't wanted to say the night before. A couple of summers ago, I moved out on my own for the first time to work at this kid's summer activity camp, which was tucked deep in the woods, about an hour and a half from where I'd grown up. All the staff lived together in these massive shared cabins, each housing roughly 40 people, and most of the time 2 or 3 people shared a room. The cabins were so huge that even though everyone's stuff was everywhere, it never felt cramped, and people basically treated each other's rooms like common areas, wandering in and out without worrying about locked doors. Over the first few days, everyone quickly formed these tight little friend groups. People swapped stories from previous years at the camp, and a sense of easy familiarity set in, which was nice but maybe made us too trusting. My role was split between daytime activities with the kids and evening shifts at the camp bar, which served the staff and the parents staying on site. One evening, my roommate, who I'll call Jess, finished her bar shift a few hours before me, so she decided to head back to our room to read while waiting for me so we could watch a movie together. She had been gone maybe 5 minutes when my phone lit up with her name on the caller ID. The bar was nearly empty, just a handful of staff lingering, so I picked up, expecting it was her checking in. The moment I answered, there was complete silence on the other end. No breathing, no static, just dead silence. I figured she'd accidentally dialed me and hung up, not thinking too much of it. About a minute later, my friend from across the hall called me, sounding urgent, telling me I needed to get back to our room immediately. I asked a colleague to cover for a few minutes and hurried down the hallway, feeling a knot form in my stomach. When I reached our room, a small group of people were standing outside, looking uneasy, and as I stepped in, I saw Jess frozen in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face, which was completely unlike her. Everything in our room was scattered across the floor, drawers half open, and my side, normally neat because I compulsively kept it tidy, was a mess. Jess explained her phone had gone missing, and when I mentioned the calls, she had no idea what I was talking about, which meant someone had taken her phone and used it to call me while she was gone. It wasn't a fancy device, just a cheap little thing, which made the whole scenario even stranger because it had no resale value. Over the next few days, other things started disappearing, but nothing valuable or typical for theft. Instead, the intruder took items that were personal and intimate, like underwear from both of our sides of the room, even from the laundry pile. The experience left me nauseated, especially since we all knew everyone we worked and lived with. A few more silent calls from Jess's phone happened over the next couple of days, adding to the creepiness, and eventually, we reported everything to our supervisors. They said they would investigate, but also pointed out that leaving the door unlocked wasn't the smartest idea. which in hindsight, I had to agree with. Then, a few days later, I walked into the staff lounge and noticed Jess's phone just sitting on the windowsill, completely alone, no one around, no explanation. I quickly retreated and locked myself in our room until she came back, and after that, we stayed extra careful. Nothing was ever solved, nobody was caught, and while it's been years, I still think about who could have done it, how they knew our routines, and why they took such personal things instead of anything valuable. It taught me a lot about trust, privacy, and the fact that some people can be disturbingly calculated even in a place that feels safe.